Firstly, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Financial Basics Foundation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Hello everyone. On behalf of the Financial Basics Foundation and our research partner Suncorp, I would like to welcome you to this webinar and discussion about the financial literacy of young Australians, and in particular, how we might improve financial education for young women in Australia. My name is Katrina Samios and I am the CEO of the Financial Basics Foundation. Just a bit of housekeeping as we get started. I encourage all attendees to type any questions that you may have using the Q&A function rather than the chat function. Either is fine, however, the Q&A function enables us to manage the questions and keep track of them a little easier. And also we have, as you can see on your screen, a number of panelists today. And I'll introduce everybody now, however, we may be turning our videos on and off throughout the session just so that we can focus on those who are speaking at the time. Firstly, Dr. Laura Deswan and Dr. Tracy West from Griffith University. Mrs. Catherine O'Kane, Principal of All Hallows School. Mr. David Berry, CEO of Way Forward. And Mr. Philip Cullum, Chair of the Financial Basics Foundation. The financial literacy of young Australians research explores why young women have lower levels of financial literacy than men. Today, with our research partner Griffith and Suncorp, we wanted to understand the apparent disparity of levels of financial literacy between women and men. In particular, we wanted to understand what was happening in schools that might cause girls to disengage from this skill. And if so, what could be done to address the problem to support young people and to develop this essential life skill. This research is the first of many which will comprise the Jo Cole monograph. Jo Cole was Honorary Treasurer of the Financial Basics Foundation for 5 years, from 2013 to 2018. Following Jo's untimely death in 2018, the Financial Basics Foundation Board resolved to honour Jo's valued commitment to the financial literacy of young people through the establishment of a perennial research project to be called the Jo Cole Monograph. Jo knew the power of education in enhancing the ability of young people to fulfil their potential and to pursue their dreams. It is the hope of the Financial Basics Foundation Board that this initiative will build on Jo's optimism by contributing to that potential and to nurture at least one of those dreams into reality. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I would like to ask everyone attending today to think about one question and perhaps write a response in the Q&A section. Also, any questions that you have throughout the session, please feel free to put those in, and if you can list specifically which panelist you'd like to address that question, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll try to get to those questions at the end of the session. But my question to everyone is, what is the one game-changing piece of advice you wish you had received about managing your money before you left high school? We know that financial well-being is inextricably linked to our individual and social well-being. We also know that schools have a key role to play in the social, emotional, and intellectual development and well-being of their students. Schools play an integral role in preparing a young person for life in the real world. Today, we have the opportunity to reflect on current practices in schools and perhaps how the findings in the research can be used to inform and shift in the way financial literacy is viewed and delivered. I'd like to introduce the researchers who will take some time to talk through their findings and the research. Firstly, Dr. Laura Deswan is the lecturer in finance and financial planning at Griffith University in the Department of Accounting, Finance and Economics. She completed her PhD at Griffith University in 2013 in the area of superannuation and ESG investing. Laura's research interests encompass most areas of superannuation, including fund investment policies, member decision-making, gender issues, taxation, and fund governance. In addition, she has a strong interest in financial literacy and capability, especially with regards to vulnerable cohorts. And also Dr. Tracy West, who is a lecturer in finance and financial planning in the Griffith University Business School. Tracy has a strong background in household finance with several publications on household finance, financial literacy and financial planning issues. Her work contributes to knowledge on investor behaviour, informing curriculum development and guidance for advisors in the financial services industry. She currently teaches behavioural finance and wealth management at Griffith University. Thanks, Laura and Tracy.
Thanks, Katrina. So Tracy is just sharing the screen. So firstly, can I say thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to share and discuss this research. It's also an honour to contribute to the first Jo Cole monograph. Jo was a really great guy, was a guest lecturer for me and always very inspiring for our students. So if we just go to the first slide. As Katrina mentioned, this project really came about because we know that there's this persistent gap between female and male financial literacy. Males have higher level of financial literacy. And you can see on the screen there, we have these scores, and these are based on a series of 5 fairly simple questions that they're multiple choice styles. So they have 3 different responses and a response that says, I don't know. And what we see is that females on average score much lower, significantly lower than males. And this is persistent. We find this in study after study after study. But at the same time, we know that young women are really capable. We know that young girls often outperform in ATAR. There's more young females in universities than there are young males. So why is it in this particular area, when we're looking at financial literacy, that they are scoring so much lower? And it's not really a new area of research. So this has been looked at since the 70s, 60s, usually around maths and ability in mathematics. And there was previously a lot of research that said, you know, well, maybe boys are just better at this. They are better at maths, girls are better at English. But we have come a little bit further since then. So there's more research that actually looks at the impact of stereotypes. And so when we think about stereotypes, that's people can actually conform to what the stereotype is. And so for young girls, that might be the case that we have a stereotype of young girls being worse at maths than their male counterparts. And so therefore, perhaps they might kind of embody that and start to think of themselves as not being able to understand these concepts and not being able to learn them very well or perform very well at these. And then that can impact on their behaviour. Even more recently, though, we are starting to see that maybe there's actually a problem in how we're measuring this ability. So I mentioned before in those questions that these are multiple choice style questions. And Tracy and I have a paper where we've looked at gender responses to these questions and found that women are more likely to select I don't know. So what we'll see with the male responses is they're more likely to select an answer, even if they get it wrong. But females are almost opt out of answering. And so that could actually be an issue with the question itself rather than how females are responding and not really measuring their actual knowledge in these areas. Could you go to the next slide, please, Tracy? So that's what this project was really aiming to do. So firstly, we wanted to look at if there's a knowledge gap there. And then we wanted to explore, you know, what is contributing to this knowledge gap that we do see in all of these studies. To be able to do that, we needed to go and talk to students, and that was in and of itself a process. So there is already a lot of research out there that is based on surveys. There's a lot of research of older Australians, university students. We really did want to talk to them in high school though, because that's when we first start to see these differences. And so, like I mentioned, there's not really any research that's done that. And the reason for that is that it's not easy. So it takes a lot of work. And at this point, I really want to thank the schools that were involved in this, that allowed us to come in and speak to their students. At each of these schools, there was a teacher or a staff member that really championed this for us, went to a lot of effort to organise space for us and students to take part. And so really a huge thank you for them, because without that, this wouldn't have happened. Next slide. So we did go to 4 separate schools and we spoke to about 90 students all up. And we spoke to them through focus groups and through interviews. Importantly, these were all state schools. So we wanted to make sure that we had a sample that represented more of the general population. We know that kids from Catholic and independent schools are more likely to be socially advantaged. So it was really important that we went into state schools. And then we also split it into regional and urban. So we went to 2 regional schools and 2 urban schools, just to see if there was actually a difference between where they were located. And what we did is we talked to these students about what they know about money and where they learn that information. And what we were looking for in those conversations was also if there were differences in how the genders experience money and learning about money, and if there were differences between those regional and urban areas. So we used the focus groups and we had combinations of all girls, all boys, and then some mixed focus groups. We also had individual interviews. So in those we could ask more personal questions about the students' experience and perhaps their home situation. And then we did also have students complete a survey just to get a bit more general information. So what do they know? You can see on the slide there that they're all pretty good with saving. So they get saving. I don't think there was a student we spoke to that didn't understand that, but Tracy will talk a little bit more about that later. They also did have some understanding of insurance, which was really good and something that I didn't really expect. But when you start to think about how students start to get their cars and need to get CDP insurance, you know, it starts to become clear why there's a bit more of an understanding there. And then interestingly, superannuation as well, they all kind of knew that that was saving for retirement. So it's a very surface level understanding, but it was there. The other areas though, if we can just go back to that one, please, Tracy. So the other areas, they really didn't have much of an understanding. Some students knew a bit more than others, but inflation in particular, that was really not well understood. And that's a bit of an issue for us because inflation is what I would kind of refer to as a foundation concept. So it has a lot of links to the real value of money, wages growth, interest. So having an understanding of inflation is important for all of these other concepts. Having said that, I'm sure if I went to those same schools now and spoke to those students, they probably would all be able to tell me what inflation is. But when this research took place, we were still in a low inflation environment and they really weren't aware of it. Okay, so where do they learn about money? Certainly parents were the most influential. Parents in particular, you know, not all parents are equal. We found that the kids who had parents that worked in finance or were had their own businesses, were self-employed, those kids knew a lot more. And that's with conversations with their parents. So they're talking about these things at home. Also, we saw if students were involved in, sorry, that's my word. If students were making a big purchasing decision and they had conversations with their parents around that and input from their parents, they had a better understanding of what they needed to consider. Our school was the second most influential, and we saw accounting and business students had no issues at all. These guys knew pretty much everything and had a good understanding as well. It wasn't just surface level. They could make comments about different aspects of money and interest and businesses and shares. But for, you know, that's only a small proportion of these students. So it's certainly maths. There was a bit in maths, but sometimes we really had to prompt these students. We know that they're learning about interest in maths, but they don't make that connection between learning about interest being a financial concept and separating it out from maths. So that was something that came up quite a lot throughout these focus groups and interviews. And then just lastly, work was the other place where students did gain a bit of knowledge. So that's in just getting their own money, having to manage that. Also managing money at their place of business. So we have students who are aware of things like ZipPay because they're their workplace offers it. And even some students that would get help from their boss with things like their income tax returns. So work could also be really beneficial for students in their knowledge and financial literacy. All right, I'll hand over to Tracy now.
Hi, thanks, Laura. Hope my volume is okay. Let me know. So thanks for having me, everyone. I'm going to talk about some further insights that led to our recommendations in our report. And of course, in the report, we do have a lot of further details, but throughout we try and let the students guide us. And so we have a lot of quotes in here to share with you. So our main themes of insights were around the gender differences, the family influence, and the role of maths in the school curriculum and financial concepts. So with the gender differences, I mean, this was a large focus of our project, was to look at specifically if there's any differences in language in how girls and boys approach conversations about money. And between them, the girls and boys that we talked to didn't identify any real differences between each other. But our observations were that there were some more social differences with how girls and boys spent money. So the girls tended to be more willing to pay for things for their friends to enable their social outings. And girls, we definitely noticed a bit of a lack of confidence in telling us what they knew and how they knew it and how they came to know it. So, and we had to prompt them quite a bit. And they did say things like the quote on the screen there, I try, but it just doesn't click. And this is specifically in relation to maths often. So we would ask them a question like, what do you know about interest? Tell us what you know. And it took quite a bit of prompting to get to relate that concept to something they might have covered in maths, and then they get stuck with the formula. So this is something we noticed quite a bit, is that they really got blocked by trying to recall the formula rather than trying to tell us a practical application of this concept. So the girls really needed some more context, but through prompting and by us, they could connect the dots. So they actually did know just as much as the boys. It just took a little bit more context or prompting to get us to get them there. So this is something that we really notice in financial literacy literature, in particular for adults and for students, is that there is a lack of confidence around maths, and maths gets conflated with these financial decisions and financial knowledge. The other really important theme was home life. So it is one of the really tremendous experiences of being involved in this project, was this understanding of how varied the household structures of these students were. There are a lot of assumptions made by policymakers and, you know, people in traditional households who are brought up in traditional households, that many students are in a household with you know, two parents. But many students we spoke to were living with single parents or with carers, or even out on their own renting. These are high school students. They were also undertaking quite heavy workloads, some of these people, in their casual jobs that they had. So this was a great surprise to us and really grounding. And some of these students, it just really talks to the importance of financial literacy in schools at this age, because some of them are dealing with a lot of financial hardship in the home and having to become financially independent quite early in life. So there are some quotes there about the hardship they observe in their households. A lot of students were wanting to contribute to the income in the household and pay their way. So this was a really important insight for us in the role of households. We did speak to some students who could identify their parents. That was the primary role model for them in terms of asking them about questions regarding managing their money or saving up for making and setting goals. And often there wasn't any real gender difference there. Many people would choose to talk to their mum. Some would choose to talk to their dad. And if they had a parent working in financial services or running their own business, they were the ones, not surprisingly, that students would go to. But this was a real minority of the people of the students that we spoke to. And the issues with maths were quite obvious to us. So as I said before, students were getting barriers to thinking about these issues of financial concepts because of the formula. And in their mathematics classes, they are really focused on inputting the variables into the equation and getting the correct answer. And if you don't get the correct answer, you got to go back and work it out. But this approach really lacks an understanding of the concept itself. Some students that were really able to recall financial concepts would relate it to a story. So there were students that related inflation to learning about this in social studies or history when they were reading about another country's inflation experiences, or a movie that they'd seen like The Wolf of Wall Street that talked about stock trading. So those stories are really important methods to help students understand and learn the financial concept before the formula is introduced. And they have to also be age appropriate assessment tasks or in-class activities that they're doing. Some students would recall assignments that they had been doing where they were practicing budgeting skills and had to design a budget for a dinner party of 180 people. Like, this is not something practical that many households have to do in everyday life. So, you know, is there any more practical things that can be done in the classroom to connect them? We did see that students are spending a lot of money on fast food, some up to, you know, $30 on McDonald's a week. And mobile phones, of course, mobile phone plans. So, you know, some schools do this. There's a common assessment of looking at the cost of a car loan and related expenses in getting a car. I mean, those things are very present for students. They are engaging in these decisions. And so that's really important to place the curriculum, to match the curriculum at the place where the students are at. So yeah, that's a summary of our issues with maths. Not all students are learning the financial concept itself, and they have trouble recalling the formula. And we would argue that in day-to-day life, the formula isn't as important as understanding the concept. So that's where we would like to focus. And, you know, maths has its own challenges with engaging students, and the way that it's taught in the classroom can be disengaging, particularly for some students most in need of this support. So our recommendations, we had 6 of them in our report. Firstly, we would like to elevate the role of financial literacy education in schools. A standalone program is our recommended approach, but we understand that classrooms and the curriculum is very busy. So we also have guidance there about integrating learning financial concepts in wellbeing programs as part of career building skills and life skills programs. We'd like to recommend a focus on the concepts and not the calculations in maths, and a range of approaches in the maths classroom to help support students learn those things. An expansion of financial literacy across the curriculum, so it's more integrated. There are lots of opportunities to integrate consumer protection or at the emotional toll of consumerism and all of these things in art, for example, or English with writing tasks. And history, even connecting these stories that other societies and countries have experienced that relate learning these concepts. A range of assessment beyond calculations. Some ideas we have for that are these written pieces, some visual or dramatic presentations, oral presentations, group work, teamwork, just some more varied tasks. Alignment of the activities in the classroom with the age appropriate financial experiences. So what are they doing? What do they relate to? What is meaningful to them? So to engage with them through that experience. And effective financial strategies for controlling spending is needed in the curriculum. So we observed that students often had savings, but they weren't actively engaged in a savings plan. It was more that they didn't have to have any expenses that they had to commit to. So we would like to see more support for controlling spending and definitely having savings plans and goals and strategies in place there to support them when they leave school. So I've probably gone through that a bit quickly, but I think I am over time. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Laura and Tracy. I'm sure everyone who is attending and who has read the report understands that it's an impressive piece of work and likely to have positive impact on the lives of many young Australians if we can bring some of these recommendations to fruition. We think you've done an outstanding job uncovering some important learnings about young people and financial literacy that were previously not well recognised or understood. So certainly everybody from Financial Basics Foundation greatly appreciates the effort and in receiving this report, the recommendations that you put forward. For those who don't know, this project started a couple of years ago, and obviously with the pandemic, there were a few hiccups and barriers and pauses along the way, and then our intention was to release this report earlier this year, and then the rains came. So once again, we were thwarted. So we appreciate that we've now got this opportunity in the webinar to talk about it and finally share the findings more broadly. Certainly from the Financial Basics Foundation's perspective, our strategic intention in relation to this and future research initiatives is to explore the state of financial capability in improving the well-being of young people. And today our hope is to find opportunities to bring the recommendations from the research to life. With that, I'd like to introduce our guests, our panelists, Mrs. Catherine O'Kane and Mr. David Berry. Catherine is the principal of All Hallows School, a Catholic girls' school with 1,620 students in years 5 to 12 located in Brisbane CBD. Catherine has over 35 years experience in education, having taught at secondary and tertiary levels across subject areas including business, Chinese, information technology and religious education. Catherine's current interests include strategic planning and leadership, and she is passionate about girls' education, structures and initiatives to support the well-being of young people and school staff and community engagement in order to empower women as a means of addressing social injustice and inequity. And also Mr. David Berry. David is the CEO of Way Forward, an organisation established in conjunction with industry and community bodies to provide a free service to assist people experiencing medium to long-term financial difficulty. David has 30 years experience in the banking industry, including executive roles in running the credit card and collections businesses for 2 major banks. He is on the board of the Consumer Action Law Centre, as well as multiple industry boards and executive and non-executive roles of bank subsidiaries. Catherine, I'd like to start with you if I can. 2 of the key findings from the research are that students generally do not know a lot about personal finance, and also that compared to boys, many girls have less confidence in themselves when it comes to financial knowledge. As the principal of an all-girls school, I have no doubt that you have observed a range of attitudes and behaviours demonstrated by your students in relation to their understanding of financial concepts and financial decision-making ability. Are you able to outline what you have observed as some of the problems or issues experienced by your students as a result of a lack of financial literacy?
Thank you so much, and it's great to be part of the panel today. We do have it is lunchtime here. We have a lot of music happening right outside my window at the moment, so I hope I'm clear enough for everybody and you can't hear too much of Diana Ross, who is now blaring out through our loudspeaker system. So a great question, and probably my thinking is around when I talk to our past pupils, particularly our recent past pupils, and their experience as they leave school, go to university or enter the workforce, and the many challenges that they face. I think that, and you know, when my CV was being read out there, I was a teacher of business over 30 years ago, and I look at how the Afterpay and all of those forward purchasing schemes have rolled out. And I just think about the importance of ensuring that all of our students really do understand compound interest, and they understand what it is to budget and what it means when you do take out those initiatives. I think looking at what we are seeing in the media at the moment about the economy, about the stress around renting also, it's understanding all of the finances around renting for our young people that are particularly important. I guess because of my stage in life, and you know, thinking about superannuation becomes important. I'm sure as a young person, I didn't give it any thought at all, any more than any young person does. But just that education also for young people, particularly at a time when there has been opportunity to draw on your superannuation. And I did question when all of that was happening, whether the people who were drawing on their superannuation and looking at those vast numbers of people who did that, did they do that with the sound knowledge of what that actually meant to their future selves? And that is just part of the financial literacy that I think it's so important that we find for our young people while they are at school.
Yes, completely agree. There's some critical issues there that we know every young person, every person faces, and certainly having some understanding of those concepts as you begin to make those decisions, we think is critical. So given the 6 recommendations that Laura and Tracy have made as part of the report in relation to how personal finance and financial literacy should be delivered in secondary schools, what do you see as a solution perhaps, or some of the ideas that can be delivered within schools to help build the financial capability of young people and girls in particular?
I think one of the really important things that you've talked about already today, Katrina, is that financial literacy is good for people's well-being, and there isn't a school in the country that is not looking at their student well-being programs. And when we look at our student well-being programs, I believe that it is essential that we build financial literacy into those programs because of the known relationship between understanding finance and how you're going to manage your finances moving forward and your well-being. So for me, I think, and we've touched already through the findings in the report around how financial literacy is handled in mathematics, if students are studying business, which is usually an elective in classes, how that's being managed. But are we ensuring that, and I like the recommendation that in mathematics, we're really looking at calculations, but financial literacy is so much more than that. Are we ensuring that it's at the right touch points where students are going to listen about financial literacy, and making sure, and in a very crowded curriculum, I know that it's challenging. I'm not pretending that it's easy to find the time, but if we think that it is valuable and we understand how important it is to people's well-being, that we need to find the time to include as much financial literacy as we can manage into that student well-being curriculum in our schools.
Yeah, great, thank you. We certainly agree, and it was fantastic to see that finding come out of the research, and hopefully a little bit of a different approach or an alternative approach that we can take as we're speaking to policymakers and curriculum writers and schools in how we can look to amplify the place of personal finance and financial literacy education in schools in a different way than it was traditionally has been placed. David, if I can come to you now, given your background in both the banking sector and now the community focus area, you've definitely seen examples, and I imagine have heard stories sitting on both sides of the fence, developing products as well as seeing the consequences of some poor financial decision making that people are making. I'm interested to hear from you if you have some examples that you have observed of some of the problems or issues experienced by young people as a result of lack of financial literacy. And secondly, similar to the question I asked Catherine, do you see any solutions that can be delivered not only in schools, but perhaps in the sector, either in banking and now in community where you work, to help build the financial capability of young people?
It's a really good question. I don't know that there's a very simple answer to, actually, I know there's no simple answer to this. And when we look at the observations that we've had as an organisation, certainly the prevalence of buy now, pay later has had quite an impact on people. I think the impact that we see is on 2 levels. The first is on people's mental health. We do see a high correlation between people's mental well-being and their financial well-being. if they're not getting the concepts right at school, it will only get worse when they go into post-school life, where income, it might be strained, and expenses, and they've just got to work through, well, how do I get the money to provide for the food or the shelter that I might need? So we do see that if the mental strain will influence people's choices. Our observations show that when people are under mental stress, they make short-term decisions that they think are good, but in reality create bigger problems that then need to be unwound or solved. That's where buy now, pay later fits. Buy now, pay later can be quite good for a lot of people, but when we're dealing with people who are in long-term or medium to long-term financial difficulty, when we have a look at their transaction statements and we see that on one particular day, there might be 15 installments coming out for multiple buy now, pay later schemes, all for small amounts. When you think, well, I'm just going to buy this dress or these shoes, or I'm going to pay for my, for this meal, you don't think too much about it until you're trying to work through a transaction statement that's got hundreds of transactions coming out to multiple providers. I think when I look at what needs to be taught to students, there's the technical solutions and there's the adaptive solutions. So the technical solutions is, by all means, everybody needs to understand budget, but it needs to be done in a way that they understand. My challenge, I've got 3 daughters, the 2 older ones decided not to do maths in year 11 and 12 and not do any business facing subjects. So they would be excluded if that was the only place they could go to. I've still got a 14-year-old and I'm still trying to work out how to teach her finance, but that's the joy of being a parent. I think the message is getting out that high interest rates and compound interest is a negative thing. I think people get that. Where I think they struggle with is, what's the difference between a want and a need? And the definition of a want will be different to different people. Just because I might say I need something and I might need it, it may not be a need for somebody else. So for them to be able to self-regulate and to be able to make that decision by themselves as to what's a want and what's a need is a really important skill that they need to learn. I think the key is also in helping them understand that the products like buy now, pay later, the installment challenges that will come, they need to be cognizant of. And the amount of payments, the frequency of payments can get quite complex quite quickly. There are some buy now, pay later systems which I would really, I would encourage people to go nowhere near. I don't necessarily want to mention organizations, but anybody who advances your pay, anybody who helps you pay utility bills, these organizations, they're prying on the weaknesses or the challenges that people are facing, and they're making money off people who really need help rather than somebody taking advantage of them. I think the other thing for students is it's about finding what they find fun with regards to finance. And that's not an easy answer because it's a different response to each of the students. Some of the things which I know from speaking as a father, one of my daughters, she loves to negotiate, and negotiation is the bit that she loves. With my other one, she loves to save for something specific. So she's got a goal and she's driven by that. Now, that's not the only things which we work with, but I think you work with what you've got and finding what they enjoy and will give them confidence. It gives them a starting point that they can always come back to when things go wrong. There's the opportunity for them to revert back and say, okay, there was a point where I did enjoy this. This was what that point was. Yeah,
100% agree. And it's really interesting to hear from both of you. And I think what I'm hearing is it reinforces that alignment around student well-being, and that these are conversations and context, and it's not what people would traditionally think is perhaps a formula or a calculation or an equation that is financial literacy, that it's about behaviours, it's about attitudes. And when you can have those conversations happening in the classroom and at home, that's that's likely to be a better application in real life than the barrier that sometimes is created by suggesting that financial literacy, is a calculation or it's a maths class. And as you said, there are so many students that perhaps don't even do maths or business subjects and therefore may not have had the opportunity to be exposed to any concept. It's certainly fair to say that improving the financial capability of young Australians requires a nationally coordinated strategy across government, education, business and community sectors. And as you said, David, there's not one simple solution. Certainly in the work that we're trying to do to elevate the position of financial literacy in secondary schools, to continue with ongoing research, to look at ways that in the curriculum we can level the playing field for girls and address inequalities that have long-term impacts of for women. It's certainly something that we will continue to do. I just wonder where now is the time to hear from the voice of the deep, which is Damien, who's been taking questions or curating some of the questions. If there's any questions, Damien, from our panelists that we could ask at this point?
Oh, there certainly is. There is so much information has been and great feedback coming in thick and fast. So thank you everyone who has contributed to that. There is a few questions, but I just wanted to highlight a few fantastic bits of advice that came in right at the start of the session. There is way too much to go through all of them, but a few that came up as common themes was co-contributing to superannuation as soon as you start work or as soon as it's possible to do so. That came up a few times in different versions. Another one was to pay more money on your mortgage than what the minimum amount is that the bank is requesting or making you pay, which was another fantastic bit of advice. And the other one I loved, it was one of our rules of thumb, which was pay yourself first in a budget, so save before you spend. And there was so many others. So I just thought I'd highlight those and thank you to the various people who sent versions of those through.
And we'll certainly curate those too and send them out as part of follow-up to this session, whether it's as part of our socials or through an EDM. We will definitely be using those game-changing bits of advice as part of the work that we do moving forward. So thank you for all of those.
And if anyone else would like to add them in, please do add some of your game-changing pieces of advice that you wish you'd received, and I'll keep adding them to the list. So on to the questions, and I know we probably won't get a chance to get through all of these, so thank you for everyone who sent questions through to me. The first one is just a general one for the panel. I'm not exactly sure who may have the expertise or the answer here, but it is just a question of, do schools in different states or territories offer any form of curriculum around specific investments specifically? So things like shares, properties, or commodities. Are any of you aware of that? That's a great question. I don't know whether the expertise extends in that area, but I thought I'd just put it out there.
Certainly some, general maths classes do cover these more investment styles, but what we see is once you get into the higher maths subjects, then they tend to not touch that sort of thing. I'm not sure if that's the experience across all of the country, but certainly in Queensland that occurs.
And that is what makes it tricky with some of the items that are compulsory subjects versus electives, and then every state and territory implementing its own flavour of the Australian curriculum always makes that a challenging one as well. But great question. The next one was more for Laura or Tracy, for both of you, and it was what you thought, what most surprised you about the findings of the report.
Laura, you unmute.
Sorry, yeah, Laura, you're muted.
I'll go. I mean, for me, the great honour of being part of this project was talking to students about their living situations and what they were learning at home or not learning at home, and having those conversations with students where we can use this as motivation to help change their trajectory. And some of the teachers would circle back around to us and tell us that, thank you so much for coming and having that conversation with Sarah, because I've been trying to get her to think about setting her goals and what she's going to do next year when she leaves school. And I haven't been able to engage her in this, but now she is thinking about how she wants her life to be different. And so that was such an honor, honestly, being part of this project. And I think, so if I can circle back around to Catherine and what David was saying, it's why financial literacy is actually a really great fit in a well-being program, because it is about career advice, it is about decision making and long-term planning. And there are skills that can be embedded in this, like delayed gratification. You know, what is the trade-off here when you are favoring the present in our present bias versus delaying that instant gratification for a benefit in the future? And psychology has some work here about our present selves and our future selves, and trying to picture our future selves and how we can imagine that future. So, and also self-control. How do we help ourselves control our behaviors? How can technology help us? How can our finance apps, our banking apps help us understand our spending patterns and help us manage the next month's spending plan? So I think it is a really great fit to embed some of this skill-based stuff, some of this conversation and planning stuff with what we can use in real life to help us manage these traits that we have and these challenges that we have.
Thank you, Tracy. Laura, did you have anything there that surprised you out of the findings of the research piece?
Definitely just what Tracy was saying about talking to the students, and really I think moving away from that idea that every student has access to parents at home who can teach them these things. They don't. Certainly we saw such a huge variety there, and that was really eye-opening.
Thank you both for that. There is a few more questions, and Katrina, please just tell me when I need to stop. I'll keep on working through as many as I can.
We're doing well with time, so it's great.
Oh, excellent. So the next one, this is again for Laura and Tracy, but I think I'd be interested to hear if any of the other panelists have a take on this as well. But it's the question is that the person who posed it is interested for your thoughts on the best delivery method of financial literacy. And I know you've just touched on that a little bit, so it's good timing for the question. But it specifically goes into things like the timing of the sessions, how to best get engagement, whether it's something like, I love that Easy Money's mentioned here, whether it's something like a game-based format like the Easy Money game that we have available, or whether textbooks and more traditional classroom learning are best suited, whether it's best in a module, and essentially at the crux of the question, sorry, it was a long one, what the most effective method is for young people to absorb and comprehend financial literacy and capability.
I think Tracy's got some pretty great ideas around this. Definitely not the old textbook approach, I would say. But Tracy might want to.
Look, I think this is an ongoing discussion with teachers and principals. We are placing a lot of responsibility on teachers if we are expecting them to be experts in this space. Many of them haven't had training. Talking about your money is historically a bit of a taboo thing, so it's difficult to share your own experiences in the classroom. So this is the challenge, and this is the next frontier. I think there are a range of things. Sometimes students are motivated through competitions and challenges. Sometimes these workshops could be delivered by independent people that come into the school to deliver these. You know, we have a really willing workforce in financial services industry who do have this want to help out. But we've had the Royal Commission, and there are a whole heap of challenges there about someone coming from a financial service provider providing financial information. So this is a really strong challenge in that we have professionals that want to do this. We have the need for money to support these programs, but there is this conflict of interest. So it is the next frontier and the next challenge on how to do this well in schools. And lots of people have tried. Money Smart has made really valiant attempts to provide resources to schools. So this is a question I don't have an answer for. There could be lots of possible solutions. we're working on it.
I will just add that from what the student feedback was when we were talking to them, they want to learn it. I think they from what we've observed, they don't want to learn it in maths. And that's why we had the recommendation around a standalone program. They definitely want to know these things. They want this understanding. They don't want to do calculations though. So.
Yeah, and that context is really important, which I've noticed that you both mentioned it at various times throughout the session and the presentation, which I think is really important as well. I'll keep going through the questions as long as we've got the time. So this one was for Catherine, Laura, and or Tracy, whoever would like to chime in on it. And it's considering limited resources and time, is there anything classroom teachers could do in the short term to build financial literacy for their students? Essentially as a takeaway from this session, as opposed to the longer term, more overarching answers. Maybe Catherine or Laura's got a microphone off if you want to start there.
I'm happy.
You start, Laura, and then I'll follow.
Really, those stories are so impactful. And so if there's anything that you're talking about inflation at the moment, that's going to resonate with them. They'll have that experience to connect to the financial concept. So any opportunities to do that really helps to create those ideas and connections in their minds, and hopefully a little bit of memory around that as well.
I agree with all of the points that have been raised about the issue of teachers aren't trained. So we've got wellbeing programs that are taught by particular staff in schools. Do they have the training to teach financial literacy? So I think that's an area that would need to be addressed if schools are going to build this into their wellbeing program. I also think that government has a key role to play here, that if government values the citizens being financially literate, then they are going to have to do work in mandating some of what has to be covered. So I think that's a really important point. And if we look at what has happened around consent education in the last 2 years, I think we have an excellent example about how government can be moved to make change, really positive change. And we now in Queensland, I can't speak for other states, but as a result of all of the feedback that has come back about the lack of adequate teaching around consent, Queensland is now about to introduce a brand new curriculum called Respect that really will address that right from the very first year of formal schooling right through to year 12. So what can be done around that area for finance and financial literacy? And I think the other area that schools could think about, and this was another great finding from the report, was what could we do in terms of parent education, picking up on that point from the report that really students at home learn a lot of their financial literacy knowledge. Could we be running sessions for, as part of our parent education programs, around how to talk to your teenager about financial literacy? Because we may have parents who themselves are financially literate, but do they know how to talk to their teenager about that? It's two different sets of skills.
Fantastic answers. Thank you both for that. The next one is actually for you, David, and then we still have two more if we've got time. It's around the gender pay gap, and it's specifically saying looking for your input on whether you think this an improvement in financial literacy education could foreseeably have a positive impact on that. I know that is a big issue that's separate to what we're talking about here today, but on that gender pay gap that exists between males and females, boys and girls.
Well, absolutely. I think there's many drivers of the gender pay gap, some that are outside the influence and control of individuals, but some that are. And some of the things that are is the level of confidence that the person has to be able to negotiate that. I think if somebody's in a good mental state because their finances are in a good position, they're a lot more aware of what their value is. And their ability to initiate a conversation and have the confidence to have that conversation is something that is within their control. So getting somebody who's able to get into that position, I think, is important. It's never that easy though, and sometimes employers will take different views. But I think the gender pay gap is closing. There are lots of reasons why it sits there. Whether they're valid or not, I don't think it really matters unless you're the person who feels you're being undervalued. And if you're feeling you're undervalued, It's what can you do to be more proactive and demonstrating your value. And this is where I think that particularly with what we saw in the report, but also with what we've talked about, is the level of confidence that young girls have to be able to demonstrate their value it's a struggle for them to articulate. You know, it's something which they walk away from as opposed to walk into. Whereas with the boys, they've got no problems in saying how good they are. Yeah, and so they can effectively bluff their way into that sort of a conversation. So I think the efforts which help women to and girls to understand their value is really, really important. If I can just finish with one point, I learned a long time ago that when the time of crisis arises, the time for preparation is over. Yeah, so you've got to have a plan. You can't just walk into things, and a plan will take away some of the fear. It will give you more confidence. I think the more that people understand the ability to step back, have a plan, work out what they want to do, what they want to achieve, is the first step to avoiding the crisis. But you can never avoid a crisis. We all have crises every day of varying degrees. So helping these the youth of today prepare for those crises so that they know when it happens what they need to do. It's a lot easier to make a decision when you've got a plan there rather than when the crisis comes and you think, I've got to do something, what do I do? So I think I really will advocate as strong as I can for the teachers that we've got. They're in a difficult position, and I would encourage them just to continue doing what they're doing to give people give the youth of today a structure so that they can solve these problems before the crisis comes.
Thank you very much for that, David. And Katrina, I think you're about to say the same thing as I am. We'll have to make that the last question. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We will try and draw the questions and perhaps, as I said, circulate via either our socials or certainly a follow-up EDM, any of the key concepts that have come out and the key questions that have been asked and get responses back to people. Just in closing, I'd like to introduce Philip Cullum. Philip is the chair of the Financial Basics Foundation and an experienced consumer advocate and regulator across different sectors. He is the chair, as I said, of FBF, as well as a board member of the Consumer Action and Consumers Federation of Australia and the Clean Energy Council. Philip, if you would just like to close it off for us and maybe share with us some of your thoughts about what you've heard today.
Great, thank you, Katrina. I know that we're running slightly late because we had such a great discussion there, so I won't talk for too long. But first of all, I just want to thank everybody who's taken part today. So great input from Laura, Tracy, Catherine, and David. Katrina, Damien, and Chloe have done a lot of work behind the scenes to make this a success. And I just want to thank Suncorp for their support of the research paper that we've been discussing, and of course everybody who's asked questions and made comments. I can see the questions that Damien's been going through, and there were a whole load that we unfortunately didn't get to. So I think that just shows the kind of what an interesting and important area this is. So I've been chair of Financial Basics Foundation for, I think, just coming up for 6 or 7 months, and so this is quite a new area for me, although I do other work on financial services. And I thought today's discussion really reinforced the extent to which Laura and Tracy's paper is an important one. I love some of the detail. It's great hearing the high-level findings, but even the point about how girls, just to give one example, how girls are more likely to pay for their friends when they go out than boys, I just thought was a really fascinating bit of insight. And I think one of the things for me, as somebody who's really interested in consumers and sort of behavioural insight and so on, one of the things that I think it really reinforced is the importance of insight into different groups of people and not treating everybody as pretty much the same. And that's really important, because then if you're going to try and make interventions to support people, you need to really understand how different people are thinking and different people are behaving, and target your interventions and your education and support to make sure that they're really effective. One of the things that I thought was fascinating was that of course there were messages from the research about savings, but particularly about spending. And again, for somebody who's worked with consumers for a long time, there's a very obvious connection into the whole world of consumer policy and consumer protection and education about how people make good decisions about spending their money and not being taken in by things that may look like a good deal and aren't. I thought there were some really important points, actually, particularly near the end of the discussion, which really pointed to the sort of wider implications of this area. You know, in some ways you could think of this as a sort of, in some respects, a sort of narrow specialist topic, but actually some of the points that particularly David and Tracy made about David's point about the connection between financial stress and mental health and the wider impact that it has, and the potential for financial literacy to help tackle some of that. Tracy's point about this is actually that financial capability work and financial education can actually be quite a good way to learn new skills. I thought was fascinating, and again, a sort of really making the case, I think, for more investment in this sort of area. And then finally, I thought I was particularly interested in some of the insights that we're getting about how people learn and absorb messages, and the importance of stories and real life scenarios, and the importance of connecting both school learning and home learning. And that's certainly something which the Financial Basics Foundation has really got at its core, already running lots of very successful popular programs in secondary schools, but we're making changes which will then allow us to go out to direct to pupils too, and of course thinking of different groups of people in the community. So I think, you know, very much a message that we've already heard and taken to heart in the foundation. So just to finish, I just want to say that this is the Financial Basics Foundation's first webinar for quite a while, I think, certainly in the time that I've been involved. And we're really keen to do more like this. I think we had 250 people registered for this. The level of comments and the number of registrations has shown what interest there was in it. So really keen to get your feedback on how you think it went, any suggestions for future topics, and then any interest on collaborating with us in what is obviously a really significant area. So with that, I think I'll draw it to a close, and thank you again for taking part.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time and input, and for everyone who attended today. Thank you.